In his war speech on February 21st, Russian President Vladimir Putin declared that Ukraine had inherited nuclear technology and know-how from the Soviet days, and with foreign support, it was only a matter of time until Ukraine makes its own nuclear weapons. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov claimed something very similar at a conference on March 1st. He said Ukraine is playing dangerous games connected to acquiring their own nuclear weapons. Ukraine's president Volodymyr Zelenskyy gave a speech on February 19th in Munich, the famous security conference, and that's where he asked or he declared it was questionable whether or not Ukraine should remain free of nuclear weapons. Because if you remember, Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons from Soviet days in exchange for a security guarantee by the United States. And this guarantee was supposed to protect Ukrainian independence. After all, there was a big referendum where Ukrainians overwhelmingly voted for independence. So it's a very complicated situation. Everybody's, of course, blaming everyone. And it's not just President Zelenskyy, it's also more politicians in Ukraine that have called for Ukraine becoming a nuclear power in terms of weapons. The American Department of Defense claims steadfastly Ukraine does not have an atomic weapons program or a biological weapons program or a chemical weapons program. But, of course, this is a very complicated matter. Russia just declared a partial mobilization. They want to draft 300,000 additional soldiers. And immediately, people have commented on that, especially about the chances of success actually deciding the war if you have 300,000 additional soldiers. Because it's not just Russia mobilizing, it's also Ukraine mobilizing more and more troops. So this is far from a guaranteed success for Russia, and that's why the debate has been mostly about whether or not Russia will use atomic weapons, biological weapons, or chemical weapons. But what about Ukraine in that matter? Yeah, do the Ukrainians have prepared such programs, and are they maybe ready to deploy? Is this maybe the case? The reason why Russia hasn't used advanced weapons of mass destruction so far, because there might be a threat of retaliation by the Ukrainians with very similar weapons. So legally, most governments can't have a legal atomic weapons program, biological weapons program, or chemical weapons program. However, you can almost get there legally. You need different kinds of facilities, you need different kinds of experts, you need all kinds of dual-use items and substances. And thereby you can prepare such a weapons program. All you then need, if you actually have to deploy such weapons, all you need is a few more additional steps. So up until the last possible moment you can wait, you can claim to not have such a program, but then you can actually launch this program really, really fast. So Ukraine has industrial facilities that can produce all kinds of chemicals. So certain chemicals are dual use or labeled as pesticides or insecticides, and it's not too far away from certain chemical weapons. And it's not just the very deadly stuff, there's also incapacitating agents as well. So not very hard to do, very easy to improvise. Then you can read up in books such as Biology of Doom, very interesting details. It used to be very, very secret about the early British and American biological weapons programs. So this was all very much improvised at first. So before you had like the Pine Bluff arsenal facilities and that sort of thing, the Brits had these large stainless steel canisters that were used for milk normally. And these canisters were perfect for this sort of work, and all you had to do is put them inside of a guarded industrial building. And then you need a few rooms, you need a few appliances and that sort of stuff. And that's how you can actually make significant quantities of certain biological weapons. And then you already have certain ammunition types where you can fill in the bacteria that you have made. So it's not the most advanced type of munition, but you can actually fill these up with anthrax or botulism or whatever, and then you can cluster these bombs together to make a really big bomb. When you detonate it, of course, a lot of the bacteria gets incinerated, but there's still enough left to harm the enemy. So even if you have only standard ammunitions, even if you have just a very basic program, you can still have biological bombs. It's very, very simple. Then you had certain exercises done by the Americans. They equipped a small team, very secret at the time. They equipped the team with $1.5 million roundabout, and the team was supposed to buy used and new equipment that is free to purchase for the most part. And then with a bit of improvisation here and improvisation there, this team was able to theoretically make a couple of pounds, I think it was, of anthrax powder. And with the right wind and the right dispensing methods, you could actually kill quite a sizable amount of enemy troops with that powder. So this is just the reality of biological weapons. So it's easy to make, it's easy to prepare, and in the very last moment, you can actually order the last few steps and fill up the ammo. And especially with biological agents, it's oftentimes pretty useful to make them fresh, to produce them right before you use them, because the shelf life is not that great unless you have advanced methods, which are also available and not that complicated. I mean, you can take standard industry type technologies for freeze drying food, and then you can just freeze dry certain bacteria. So after the American program for biological weapons was fully operational, the experts had done another summary about this type of warfare. Lots of tests have been conducted, open air tests on their own soldiers, possibly even illegal tests in foreign countries, but that's hotly debated. And the conclusion was that pretty much every country can do this, and it's not very hard to do, and even non-state actors can do this. So logically, if Ukraine actually wanted to have a program such as this, it would be very quick and easy to start such a program and then have it ready in case the Russians use these type of weapons. You could retaliate. Even the threat may be enough to deter Russia. So Russia would then have to resort to conventional warfare, which is very expensive and very time-consuming, as you have seen. Over the course of the war, during the last few months, moving all these tanks and refueling and coordinating all this, it's just a nightmare. So then we get to the question of atomic weapons. A basic atomic bomb design is fairly simple these days, so that's not even the hard part. The hard part is the enrichment of special type of uranium or the production of weapons-grade plutonium. On theconversation.com, you can find an interesting article debunking myths on nuclear power. I mean, they say it's not for making bombs, but it sort of is, and I'll get to that in a moment. They said experiments had been done as early as the 1960s and 1970s, and these experiments showed that even a single capable scientist could recreate the Fat Man bomb design. This is the bomb that was used in Nagasaki. And let's remember, the bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were intended to force Japan to capitulate to prevent many more deaths by conventional warfare. So the Japanese had vowed to fight to the last guy and to the last little island, and the Americans were determined to force a capitulation. So the calculations ran into the millions of deaths, and so the decision was made to use nuclear bombs. So to make a basic bomb, you need about 60 kilograms of uranium-235. This is 80% pure. So 80% is pretty serious. It's not 90%, which is better, but you can pretty much guess that it's kind of a very heavy, clunky bomb. 60 kilograms. It's fairly substantial. So question is, do you have delivery systems for that kind of bomb, and or do you have to just drop it? So then you have better enriched uranium, and then you have plutonium. Plutonium makes it possible to make smaller bombs, and you only need a few kilograms for a single bomb. And in Ukraine, you have several atomic reactors to produce electricity. So you have the specialists, you have materials, you have machines. So maybe over the years, small amounts of plutonium, maybe small amounts of weapons-grade plutonium have been produced and sequestered away, or highly enriched uranium, it has been sequestered away. Maybe there's enough stuff around for a couple of nuclear bombs. Then you had the nuclear power plant of Zaporizhzhia, which was in the news because the Russians took it over, and it was kind of a security scare. And the Russians accused the Ukrainians of basically making bomb materials, or storing and making weapons-grade plutonium and uranium. Even the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Authority organization, even that guy said, well, maybe there's weapons-grade stuff there. It could be tons of it, and we should check. Maybe we will find out that weapons-grade stuff has been missing, whatever. So he was talking about a few hundred kilograms of weapons-grade material that may have disappeared. So if you do the math, you can make maybe 20, 30, 40 bombs out of that, which is significant. If you're in the double digits or triple digits of warheads, then you are actually a significant player when it comes to nuclear weapons. Back in the old days, Ukraine got its nuclear fuel for the power plants from Russia, and starting in 2008, there was a new supplier, Westinghouse, from the United States. There's even uranium mining in Ukraine, so they have their own source of uranium. There are multiple places where you can actually enrich uranium, maybe secret facilities, and there are research reactors in Ukraine. On the website CND UK, you can find interesting information, interesting bits of information about nuclear power and its relation to nuclear weapons. So it's a very close bond between the two things, creating weapons and creating electricity. And most governments are keeping the details secret. It was bombs first, electricity later. So first was the nuclear bomb industry, and then out of that grew the nuclear power industry. In Great Britain, for example, in Britain, the nuclear power program was used as a cover for military activities. Queen Elizabeth, in 1956, she launched Britain's first nuclear power plant at Calderhall in Cumbria, and this was all labeled as peaceful usage and great new electricity that we're making. But primarily it was a production facility for weapons-grade plutonium. Then you had the Windscale plant, or Sellafield plant, it was called later. Lots of scandals, and in 1983, Greenpeace caught them releasing highly radioactive waste into the ocean through a pipeline. And so then the company running the facility, they sued Greenpeace. They tried to stop them from making further discoveries, and it was not just polluting the ocean, polluting the environment. The big issue was that all these, or especially the first generation of British nuclear power plants, first generation, was developed in a way that it was mostly geared towards making weapons-grade plutonium, and creating electricity was just a side gig, side hustle. All these processes that you use in those sort of applications, so mining uranium and processing uranium enrichment and so on and so forth, it's kind of the same for civilian use and for military use. You also make tritium, which is used in atomic weapons. And the British government, for example, is using the nuclear power plant Hinkley Point C to help the British Trident system of nuclear weapons. So that's why the government is subsidizing some of these power plants with taxpayer money, because they're not actually made to make money, they're made to make weapons. It will be interesting to see how this Ukraine war proceeds further, whether or not we're going to see ABC weapons, or maybe it will remain a conventional fight because both sides have ABC weapons. Now, if any country can do this, then this becomes a very big issue for the three superpowers, because besides the economic power, what keeps other countries from challenging, the status quo? What about Japan if they want to become an empire again, or the French or the Turks? What's going to stop them from actually becoming power players? So maybe this was a reason for a secret cartel of the superpowers. I've been talking about this a lot because this is a major scenario that virtually nobody's talking about, even though it makes perfect sense for the three superpowers to have a secret cartel at the top and to use controlled conflicts and to use all this tension to keep all the other countries down, to keep them in line, to maintain the status quo so nobody actually becomes a threat to this cartel.